Hello, everyone. I'm Ros Atkins from BBC News. It's good to be speaking to you from London, and welcome to this latest Strategic Insight session at the WTTC's Global Summit. And whether you're watching in Cancun or in lots of other places around the world, you're very welcome. And the broad theme of this summit is uniting the world for recovery. And we're going to take that theme and look at it through the European prism for the next 45 minutes, because this session is titled Map to the Future, Accelerating the European Recovery. And all of you watching, I'm sure, will know the challenges that the European tourism sector has been facing. Let me just share with you a couple of figures. This is the largest region for international visitor spending in the world. In 2019, over $600 billion was spent. That's 37% of all international spending. But the impact of the pandemic has been enormous. There's been a 10% fall in jobs in the sector in Europe. International visitor spend is down by a staggering $400 billion. That's over 60%. And travel and tourism's contribution to GDP in Europe fell by almost 50% because of the pandemic. So the challenges are considerable. Of course, there was a little respite in the summer of 2020, but now the second and the third waves have come along in some countries. And so the sector's looking to the summer of 2021 and beyond to plot a way out of this. And I guess when we need to consider how that's done, there are some big themes that governments and industry bodies are wrestling with, from vaccine passports to quarantine policy, to foreign travel advice, to financial support for the sector, to long-term mitigation policies such as social distancing and mask wearing. And as we consider all of those factors, it's probably also worth introducing the WTTC's 4 principles for trying to restore international mobility, which are international coordinated approach, individual assessments rather than country assessments, health and hygiene protocols, and broader support plans, long-term support plans for the sector. And it's going to be fascinating to hear from our guests as to whether they align with those WTTC principles, whether they see those as central to the way this recovery is shaped. Well, if that's the context, let me introduce you to our esteemed panel. We're joined by Caroline Leboucher, CEO of Atout France, which is the France Tourism Development Agency. Roberto Martinoli is president and CEO of Silversea Cruises. Friedrich Joussen is the chief executive of the TUI Group. Nigel Huddleston MP is Minister of Tourism for the UK government. And Robin Ingle is chairman and CEO of Ingle International. All 5 of you, thank you very much. You will have all spent the last 12 months or more trying to help your countries or your businesses respectively navigate the vast challenges the pandemic has thrown up for this sector. I'm interested to start by hearing what's worked for you. What things have you learned in the last 12 months that you're able to take and place as part of your plans for the coming months, for the coming challenges? And perhaps, Caroline, we can start with you in France.
All right, thank you, Russ, for giving me the floor. I think that we've all learned a lot during this pandemic. It's been a test and learn situation, and we've had to learn our lesson very quickly regarding the need for coordination, regarding the need for more data, and regarding the need for solidarity. I think that we've learned that we absolutely need to act as a group and be very proactive in terms of coordination.
So your emphasis is on coordination. Roberto, what about you?
Well, I think that advanced and clear communication is always been extremely important, and understanding that we've been facing something that was absolutely navigating uncharted waters, allow me this term coming from the cruise business. Of course, this has been a challenge, but besides coordination, which is very important, I think that advanced and clear communication is paramount to move forward in the most efficient way. And obviously, cooperation between operators and legislators is another very important thing, because we all have some expertise in what we really do in our particular field that can be definitely put at the service of the legislators to make the best possible choices.
can I ask you to explain a little more about what you mean by communication? What would you like to be done better within Europe in the coming summer?
Well, I mean, it's not only about Europe, of course, but certainly in Europe as well, is that there is a lot of people, communicating and speaking about how do we need to go, in terms of facing this particular situation. And there is a lot of different opinions and different, approaches that are communicated. So this confuses a lot our consumers. So it would be great if there was a little bit better I could say alignment on this type of communication, which is probably a desire that is not difficult to satisfy, but it would be really most welcome.
Thank you. Friedrich, I wonder what your experience with TUI has been and how you plan to navigate the next few months.
I think the first thing we learned is that safe travel is possible if you apply health protocols and at the same time people like their vacations. We had 2.5 million customers, which is just around 10% of customers last year, 10% of a normal season. But the 2.5 million customers, we had only 1 per 100,000 7 days incidents. So it was, very successful applied health protocols. At the same time, customer feedback was very positive on vacation. So it is possible to combine health with a pleasure holiday. And the second thing I think we learned all is that testing is not a big problem. So customers think testing is okay. Of course, lateral flow test and antigen test better than PCR because it delivers results immediately. But testing is okay. What's turning off customers is quarantine. I mean, quarantine is something which is a big issue. And here my view would be, particularly in light of the new vaccination programs and so on, that vaccination is very important, testing is very important with immediate results, but quarantine is something which is toxic to the travel industry. And maybe these are the two which I would highlight most.
Very interesting, and you lead us on to one of the points of tension. And Nigel, Huddleston, if I could bring you in here, there has been tension, hasn't there, between the UK government and its quarantine policy and some people within the sector?
Yes, but I would say overall, probably the real lesson learned is the positive relationship between government and public bodies and the private sector and businesses. And that partnership, that cooperation has been really important. You're absolutely right. There's no easy options. There's no easy answers here. I don't think any of us would pretend otherwise. And every single option we pursue has a downside. But I do think it's important. We've got to bring the public with us as well, because they're concerned and they're alarmed. The sector's done a great job at actually reassuring customers and the customer base that we can travel safely. But we have to do so cautiously still, because we're in a global pandemic. And in a global pandemic, there's no such thing as completely safe travel, but we need to do everything we can to reassure customers, both domestically and internationally, that all stakeholders, government and businesses, are taking their responsibilities seriously. And actually, I think we've largely seen that, actually.
And if your aspiration is to offer reassurance and also to allow travel when it's safe, when you look back over the last 12 months, what are the things that you feel have gone well that you could apply into a longer term strategy, not just for the UK, but for Europe more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants the restrictions measures in place any longer than necessary, but none of us really know at the moment how long necessary is. But I think that transparency is key. I say that public-private partnership is really important. Speed of decision-making is really important as well, in recognizing that we're doing so with imperfect information and communicating as clearly as possible. And I think things like announcing furlough schemes, which actually were pivotal to saving jobs in Europe across the travel and hospitality sector, as well as many others, were really key as well. So that kind of speed of decision making and announcing policies, and the announcements as well as the policies themselves, the mere announcement of policies and giving that reassurance that government is there to work with the private sector to secure jobs itself was really important. And despite all the criticisms, I would say actually most governments across Europe and indeed around the world have acted quite quickly actually over the last year in order to try and reassure business and industry, as well as dealing with the health issues. And that's been really important to make sure we've got a a base travel and tourism sector on which we can recover.
Minister, for the moment, thank you very much. Already two big themes coming out: how best to coordinate and how best to communicate. Robin, let me bring you in from Thailand now. How has your last 12 months shaped your plans for the coming 12 months and beyond?
Well, our 12 months actually started about 4 months before, because we have operations in China, in Beijing and Shanghai. We saw what was happening in China ahead of time. We knew we had to respond to it. And because we go across different kinds of industries, we deal with mobility insurance, travel insurance products globally. Our partnership, for example, the head office is in Paris. On the reinsurance risk side, it's in London, UK. The rest of the businesses are in Toronto, Canada. And we provide healthcare and technology. So immediately working with the WTTC, because I have to say that from March on, the WTTC actually provided great guidance in this, and being on the calls weekly really helped. Integrating our technology so that we could start creating interoperability of health passes and travel passes, creating insured products so that individual clients and countries could actually provide some kind of COVID peace of mind was one of the first things we did. And I got to tell you, we had to convince the insurers. They were risk adverse, even though the brunt of the health issues were related, governments had to take that on. It wasn't the insurance industry that took that on. They took on the trip cancellation, trip interruption side of it. But the health was taken by governments, was a huge burden globally. And I think one of the things we had to realize is this isn't going to be short term. And what's nice about coming to this discussion is that communication is the key. Governments had to make it up as they go because nobody really had a firm idea of what was happening here. Companies had to at the same time. So this isn't, this is a human issue, a global issue. And we have to remind everybody that.
So let's immediately get into this issue of communication, because all five of you in different ways have referenced it. And while no one would disagree that clear communication to the public, whether they're traveling or not, would be something to aspire to, in reality, this is a complex equation, because we have the French government offering one type of advice, the UK government offering another, the Italian government offering another, and then we have big companies as well also taking different positions and also communicating direct with their consumers. So I'd be interested to hear from all of you, how do we go from the aspiration of wanting to communicate clearly to managing to do that? Because that's far from easy. Caroline, in France, how do you align that? How do you align what the French government wants to say, what French businesses want to say, and then what businesses and governments around Europe want to say?
Well, we are very coordinated between both the public authorities, the government, and the industry, and that's absolutely key. So that transparency and trust are there, and so that we can ensure that the right measures and the right announcements are made. So we have a weekly meeting, and even more often sometimes, with key players, key stakeholders from the travel and tourism industry. So that's how we've been working for 1 year, which of course is quite heavy, but at the same time, I think it ensures that the right messages and the right measures are taken at the right time to rebuild trust, to rebuild tourism flows. That's absolutely key.
Nigel Huddleston, do you sometimes get frustrated on behalf of the UK government that what you're saying doesn't necessarily line up with what other governments are saying?
I wouldn't say it's frustrated as such, but I think there's a lot of empathy amongst government ministers, and I talk to other tourism ministers around Europe and the world fairly frequently. I think we do all recognise that we're dealing with a fast-moving situation. And probably we shouldn't confuse clarity of communication, because I think most governments have tried to be very clear with that speed of decision making, which means sometimes things change really, really, really quickly. And we recognise that's incredibly inconvenient to both the public and businesses. But we have to deal with the world as it is. and recognize that sometimes, in particular with the virus, we have a sudden surge and there's an expectation and requirement to respond and react incredibly quickly, recognizing that's extraordinarily inconvenient. So I'm not going to stand here and criticize any government. I think every government, and as you said as well, actually, Robin, you know, companies are the same thing. They've had to respond very, very quickly to circumstances. And that inhibits clarity of communication, notice of change, and all of those things that in a normal world we would desire. But the reality is we just can't operate in that environment at the moment. We have to respond incredibly quickly. And that means the occasional very quick, inconvenient changes that we all have to deal with.
And so if we bear those points in mind, Roberto, Friedrich, and Robin, perhaps Friedrich first, how does a company navigate the communication challenge here where individual governments are all saying and advising slightly different things? How can that be addressed on a Europe-wide level?
Well, we all understand that this is a very challenging situation because first of all, we are facing something that is not completely known. We are learning a lot about it every day. So we have to be understanding that we need to be acting with a lot of agility, because as it was said, I mean, you know, there are many things happening very, very quickly. There is need to intervene. We are looking into something that is partly unknown. And unfortunately, the other thing is that there is not an homogeneous situation. And we that are operating across countries, because by the nature of the business that we do, we move from one country to another. I mean, you know, with our ships, we feel that very strongly. The problem is that, you know, when things are changing from one country to another, even if they are close to each other, it's a big challenge. So what I'm saying is that understanding that there are a lot of challenges, that but the aspiration is to be a little more coordinated where possible, with the understanding that it's not going to be easy, but the more we can make it happen, the better result we will achieve in allowing people to move more confidently.
Roberto, I want to understand this. Who do you want to help you better coordinate? Is it the individual governments? Is it the European Union? Is it the WTTC? Which bodies, which people can help that achieve the goal that you've just described?
Well, I think that the WTTC is doing a great job, because, I mean, they are trying to convene all of this information, I mean, you know, to the various interested parties. I think that there is, but there needs to be a little bit more of an interaction between among governments and between governments and operators that can give their contribution, with the aim to be a little more consistent if we can and where we can. That would ideally be a great, I would say, a push to return quicker into service and to have better results in a shorter period of time.
Friedrich, what about TUI's perspective on this? What could make the experience for you as a company, but also for your customers, smoother between countries? Because of course, the nature of your business is that you're moving people between one country and another.
I mean, first of all, I think when you look at some of the anecdotes, right? I mean, some of the communication difficulties, and I don't say it's easy. I say it's difficult, but I give you one example. I mean, you know, in Germany, there was, because it was complying to rules, and the incidence in Mallorca was very low, the borders to Mallorca opened for flying, right? At the same time, the German governments decided that travel to the Baltic coast in Germany was not possible. So people asked, wait a moment, I mean, you can fly to Mallorca, but you cannot fly, or you cannot drive your own car to a camping ground in the Baltic Sea. So, and people said, wait a moment, you hop on a plane, and that shouldn't be dangerous. And at the same time, it should be dangerous if you go with a camping ground in Germany. You see, it's different audiences, and it's different purpose. And at the same time, for example, another anecdote is now the Greek government has said, you know, they accept one vaccination Brits, you know, to Crete or the islands. At the same time, you know, them coming back, maybe it's an orange country or whatever, they need to go into quarantine. So it seems to be that different interests, different audiences somehow cause problems. And I think what would be incredibly helpful if the communication was based on the same, let's say, results or facts, right? If we said, you know, if incidents are low, then we can do this. If incidents are this, then we can do something else. But it seems to be that audiences are different, that sometimes political interests are different. Of course, you know, I mean, the Greek have enormous interest in capture tourism, and it's maybe less of an interest in to send Brits to Greece. So I think, you know, having the same rules, let's say, or fact base would be helpful, and also maybe the same consequences or an agreed consequence of certain facts. That, you know, maybe it's not only a communication problem, maybe it's also a problem that we are working according to different rules.
So you're looking for a standardized policy approach across Europe. Nigel Huddleston MP, Minister for Tourism in the UK. Let me bring you in. And I should emphasize, Mr. Huddleston, I'm not expecting you to speak on behalf of every government across Europe, of course. But in the UK's experience, the UK now has a system in place for travel. It's got another traffic light system coming down the track as well. But do you, as a government, have an aspiration to align your systems with other government systems, or is that not something the UK would seek to do?
No, we absolutely do want to do that. You're right. The Global Travel Task Force, which was set up in the UK, is working to encourage just that, to try and help work together with other governments to get global travel moving again. That's in the best interest of UK travellers and the UK economy, but also globally. I mean, travel and tourism is hugely important. We all know that. Everybody on this call knows. So we absolutely want to work and are working very closely with our EU partners and indeed around the world. And, you know, this is one of the myths of Brexit. Actually, we have left the EU, but we still work incredibly closely with our European partners because it's in our mutual interest to do so. So we are keeping very, very close, particularly on the technology developments, the systems of vaccination, certification, and so on that are being developed across Europe. And we want to work in partnership so that we can enable travel. You know, let's be honest, it's not going to be easy to travel. It's not going to be seamless to travel over the next few months and potentially years, but we want to make it as simple as possible. And I think that's a shared goal around most major economies.
And that lines up with what Friedrich was saying. Robin, if I can bring you in here, the dominant body in European politics is, of course, the European Union. Are you surprised that there hasn't been a greater level of standardization across EU countries in terms of what people can and can't do, both businesses and travelers?
No, and look, I have private business, so I can say some things that maybe others can't. Governments are there to protect their citizens, and their citizens are the ones that vote. You have to understand that. So the EU is the EU, but it's also made up of a number of different countries, and they have to be worried about the culture, the thinking processes of those individuals in their countries. I'm not surprised whatsoever. And what's happening now, and I got to go back, there was false information, lack of information at the beginning of the pandemic. It was very confusing. And consumers, unfortunately, they have this kind of long-term, short-term memory. It's very interesting. So there was a lot of bad information. Now the scientific community, the governments have worked together. They have a lot of data. They understand what's going on. So for example, there were rules I had to do to leave the UK, to arrive in, get on the airline, to arrive in Thailand. I had to fill out forms, and very complex. I had to go through quarantine, but I had to suck it up. That's the way it is right now. And I wanted to see my son, who's been teaching in Chiang Mai, and I haven't seen him in 2 years. And the only way I could do it is do that. The same with a PCR test. I had a lot of people telling me that consumers would not take the PCR test because it costs too much. If they want to go someplace, they will pay that to do it. And we're not going to be pre-pandemic where everybody was trying to shave the money down on a trip someplace and, all inclusive, go and enjoy yourself. We're now getting back to a point where people are looking at what they want to do, where they want to go, and how they want to spend their money and their time. And it's not going to be easy. It's like Nigel was saying, but I think the whole industry has a duty now to help the consumer. We're trying with technology, we're trying with our products, we're trying to give them protection, get that peace of mind, get that fear away. But I think all of us have to work to try to create that consumer journey and help them with that so they understand what to do.
But that is a fascinating point that you're making, Robin, that consumer expectations of what they'll pay and what they have to do are being fundamentally shifted, you're arguing, because of the pandemic. I'd like to ask all of you, perhaps starting with Caroline, when we talk about a European recovery, I assume we're not talking about just going back to where we were at the start of this pandemic. We're presumably heading in the direction of a new type of travel and tourism. So from France's perspective, how do you see the way consumers behave and the holidays they want and the travel they want to do changing when the recovery is in place?
You're right, Russ. I think that we've seen a number of changes, but also some acceleration in a number of trends. For example, staycation. There was, of course, this huge movement of staycation, but it was just a reminder that for most European countries, domestic tourism is key. At least for France, it's 2/3 of the tourism industry. So that was a great reminder of how important proximity and domestic tourism are important. I think that this might be something we might build on. We were looking for long-haul tourists. I think that we had just forgotten that it was very important as well to serve and give a better service and incentives for local tourism as well. The second issue is, in terms of trends, would probably be sustainability. I think that people have observed that maybe the pandemic could be due to human activity in a certain way. And probably each one should behave in a more responsible way. That's a second global trend which has been accelerated, I believe. A third trend might be authenticity. I think that people are looking for, some travels that are a travel that matter, really, a travel that matter. And that might be something else. Maybe we'll see more longer term stays and less, short trips to another European city during a weekend. But that might be another trend. So we probably have, as an industry, as operators, NTOs, we have to adapt to that situation.
Well, you're quite right that the words sustainability and authenticity appear to come up more and more in conversations around travel and tourism. Let's pick up on the staycation idea. Nigel Huddleston, Minister of Tourism for the UK. Anecdotally, I know this to be the case, and I've also seen the data. Brits are holidaying in the UK on a scale that we've not seen for a very long time. The question is, when they can go abroad, do you think they'll simply revert to what they used to do?
Look, Brits love to travel, both domestically and overseas, actually. I mean, disproportionately compared to many other nations, we do love traveling. It's in our hearts, it's in our blood. So I know lots of Brits want to travel and want to get overseas again, and I'm sure many of them will again this year. But certainly we have seen opportunities to really push the domestic market in a way that we haven't seen in a while. And many people who've not had a British holiday for quite a few years, last year in particular, and I'm sure again this year, will have a British holiday and realize actually it's a pretty good experience and good value for money, and there's a variety of things you can do here. So I think we need to leverage that that interest in the UK market, the staycation market, but also a bit like in France, actually, we need to make sure that we push the whole offering of the UK. So it's not just the coastal resorts and the beauty spots, but the cities as well, because I think the cities are going to be a little bit slower to recover with the impact on the event sector and business travel and so on. So whilst there are pockets of the UK domestic market that I think did okay last year and probably will do well this year, we've also got pockets where they need marketing, they need the push, they need the support as well. And also the seasons as well. We want to make sure that a British holiday isn't just a May to October thing, but actually throughout the whole of the year, we need to encourage people. So if they go back to Mallorca or Ibiza or anywhere else this summer or next summer, great, but we need to capture them to have a shoulder season holiday in the UK as well. And I think we're seeing an appetite for that, which is good for the long-term future of the British market.
Very interesting. So that's the UK government emphasising the need to evolve the tourism and travel calendar. Friedrich and Roberto, let me bring you in here on Robin's point that he's seeing a shift in what consumers are prepared to pay and also what they want in return for their investment in their travel and tourism. Friedrich, can you see do you anticipate a shift from the European consumer?
Sure. So first of all, I mean, vacation has been throughout the last 10 years the most important consumer purchase per year. So it is a top of mind purchase, and it will stay a top of mind purchase. You make a decision for yourself, for your family, for your partner, and so on. It's a difficult purchase, it's an enjoyable purchase, it's an important purchase. The interesting thing, I think, what we see right now on macroeconomic data is the savings rate per households is actually up from average Europe 11% to 17%. And that actually says people have not spent money, and there's an enormous pent-up demand. The second, what I see is in market research, there is a change, but not so much sustainability. It's more about safety and about flexibility. So people have the experience, okay, I had booked a holiday, I couldn't go to the holiday, I was actually trying to get a reimbursement of my prepayment. That kind of flexibility has been part of our product for the last 12 months. We have made it part of a product. And this will stay because people have now the experience and the short-term experience, that they actually want to be able to shift, if there is certain restrictions and so on. I think that's very important. Where we don't see any difference so much is actually the way of how to make holidays. But here what we see is that people have been at least the last 6 months, or let's say 9 months, very opportunistic. So they said, usually I go to the Canaries. Okay, Canaries is closed. Now I go to Mallorca. Mallorca is closed. I go to Crete. I mean, it is people in the northern hemisphere of Europe are hungry for sun, and they are hungry for relaxation. And when it's possible to open a certain destination, they will go. And that's the reason why my personal projection is, I think the move we have seen right now from Greece, being a first mover, saying one vaccination of Brits is okay, and we by the way, also said we will vaccinate everybody on the islands of Greece. I mean, it's a very smart move because they, I think the instinct will be, I book where it's possible, and therefore, if we can make, as I said, safety is important, flexibility is important. If we can make something trusted, safe, and trusted, flexible, people will immediately move because the money is at hand. As I said, the savings ratios are very high.
Ross,
two very strong themes there: safety and flexibility. Robin, you want to come in?
Yeah, I agree totally. We've seen that right across the board. As there was fear in the consumer, they were afraid of their health, and they were upset and frustrated with the vouchers that were given out, the trip cancellation issues that happened. And there were a lot of companies, I got to tell you, in the insurance industry, there was a lot of companies that were pointing fingers at other insurance groups rather than sitting down with the consumer and sorting it out. We had to get involved many times to do that. And I think that's a clear message: is safety, investments in health, information about health. That's a very important part, because I can tell you, for example, because of the fast vaccinations in the UK, I can guarantee you that the UK will resonate well. Part of what we do right now is insure international students traveling around the world. There's a huge interest now in the UK because of the vaccinations. And international students are not just a short term, it's coming back to Caroline. They're long-term stays. They bring a lot to the economy. So there's some benefit there. So I do think there's a change coming, and it's being built by TUI, for example. It's being built by the different governments, and it's being built by individual companies like ourselves to target those people.
Roberto, let me bring you in here. I'm interested to hear your reflections on how you think the consumers' expectations are changing as we go into this summer and beyond.
Yeah, sure. I was saying that I echoes the previous comments that were made about a huge amount of pent-up demand that is surfacing in this moment. So what happened is that at the very beginning, in the big chaos that was generated by this pandemic, everybody panicked and everybody was frozen. But I would say that now we are getting a lot of push from consumers. Consumers want to go back. The fact that they've been out of travel or, with a more complicated choices to be made and less available, has made them consider their future travel plans maybe in a little different way. As was said before, they've been considering other options. They were forced to consider other options. And the other issue is that most definitely brands that have been more, I would say, better coordinated and doing things in a better way in terms of the refunds, the reprotection, and the sort of things have gained a huge amount of traction. So the consumer now, because they are probably, they have more savings in their pockets, and because they've been able to really see that there are differences around, they are probably pointing their attention towards whoever has been the best performer, what brands have been more solid in going through this, and this has been pretty clear. But I think we are all observing at the moment in that they are now pushing us because they really want to go back. And one of the things that is definitely extremely, sustainability is very important, but is one of the things that people have top of mind. But I would say that also experiential travel is something that is really getting a lot of attention, and people are really looking for something like that. So it's definitely top of mind, at least in the segment of travel where we are in. And of course, this increase of demand is giving us a lot of, or return of demand, better to say, is giving us a lot of optimism. For the months to come.
And that's an interesting problem to have. Sorry, Friedrich, carry on.
One anecdote I think is important, because I looked at our global travel numbers, and we see already huge pickup in bookings of Americans to Caribbean, and this is maybe the biggest booking surge I have seen, and we are already above 19 numbers in terms of bookings, and what you see is, and when you ask our American customers, when you ask them, the biggest difference between them and everywhere in the world is that when you are vaccinated, you have rights to travel, you are accepted in other countries, and you are accepted to come back. And that is the confidence which has, in my view, made an enormous difference. And this trend is only now, I would say, 2 weeks old. And I have seen, the level of vaccination in the US seems to be the catalyst, which actually gives confidence to people. When I travel to, let's say, Mexico, when I travel to Caribbean in general, I'm vaccinated, so I'm safe. And when I'm back, I don't have an enormous hassle. And that's what has actually, at least in the US, started to make a difference.
And this is a really interesting point to come out of the discussion. Both you, Friedrich, and Robin are describing how vaccination programs in individual countries are shaping the behavior of consumers, whether it's international students looking to go to the UK or Americans looking to travel to the Caribbean. And there's a broader message as well coming from all of you, which is get ready for the surge. Everyone needs to have a plan for when this surge starts playing out, this pent-up demand. Now, we're into the last 5 minutes of our discussion. We've talked a lot about flexibility, and inevitably, and Nigel Huddleston's reflected on this as well, governments and companies and consumers all have to be flexible at the moment because of the ever-evolving nature of this pandemic. We've got a short-term lockdown in France at the moment. We've got surge testing going on in the south of London at the moment. We've got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine program in South Africa being suspended. All of these developments coming at very short notice. So inevitably, flexibility is going to be needed. My final question to all of you is, what can governments do financially to offer stability to businesses and to the consumers as they navigate this ever-evolving pandemic? Obviously, we've had furlough schemes in place in the UK and lots of other countries. As we go forward, what support would you like to see for the industry so it can keep building a recovery through the inevitable twists and turns of the next few months? Caroline, let's start with you.
Okay, so of course we have this EU recovery plan, Next Generation EU, which is absolutely key to keep this industry alive and kicking. We have, of course, national schemes as well, and we have this specific recovery plan, which was installed as soon as last year by the French government. This is for the industry, and we need those various measures, of course, to go on as long as possible, because if a surge is sudden, it might take time still to get back to the normal activity for the industry. The second issue, I think, is to get those vaccines and tests free, or at least as affordable as possible. I know that if you look at the situation in various EU countries and the UK, the situation is quite different. In France, vaccines and tests are for free. I know that it can be quite costly, really, in the UK, for example, for instance. So I think that that's another issue where the governments might help as well.
So potentially covering the cost of testing, potentially extending current measures further down the track. Nigel Huddleston, let's hear about the UK's plans, the UK government's plans to support a tourism and travel recovery.
Yeah, well, before I answer that, I should, well, it's part of the way of answering it, I should also say thank you to the WTTC, and I say this on behalf of probably all tourism ministers around the world, because as a body, they've provided huge amounts of information and data, advice, suggestions that has been hugely valuable, because if we wait for government data to come in, obviously that's going to be too late. We're working in a world where we need information right now, and actually industry bodies, including WTTC, I speak to Gloria all the time, but industry bodies overall have really proven their worth, I would say, over the last few months, and that cooperation between the private sector and government's been really important, because that real-time data flow has helped inform decision making. And one example of that in the UK is the extension of the furlough scheme, is the extension of various government schemes, which is needed. You'll be aware that we've reduced the rate of VAT on tourism offerings as well in the UK, and that came about because of the data given by the private sector in terms of need and what the impact would be. So that continuation of flow of information is really pivotal here. And I think governments will show flexibility and agility, just like the private sector is, in terms of the response. And I think governments around the world have shown that if there's a need for an intervention, there's a willingness for government to intervene in a way that we haven't seen for a long period of time. And so I think that ongoing partnership is key. But like many of the other panelists today, I am very, very optimistic about the long-term future for the global travel and tourism sector, because the demographics and everything and the economic trends are absolutely in our favor. The sector is always, getting hit, but then recovers with incredible speed. We've gone through an incredibly difficult time with the global pandemic, but I have absolute confidence of a very strong domestic and international recovery over the next few months and years, because the sector is so agile and so resilient, and the overall long-term trends are very positive, but we all need to work together.
So an optimistic message from Nigel Huddleston. Let's finish with Robin, Friedrich, and Roberto. Just quickly, if you would, the three of you, what ongoing economic support do you think governments or international bodies need to be offering the sector in Europe to make sure that this summer is the start of a recovery? Perhaps Robin, you could go first.
I think more of a public-private partnerships going forward is going to be very important, because the governments can't do it all on their own, and the companies in the corporate industry can't do it all on their own. And we've got to be clear with ourselves. This is not going to be fast and furious over the next 6 months. There are a lot of countries, I'm originally from Canada. Canada, we could not get vaccines. So even though we got, complained about buying more than anybody else, we couldn't get any. Japan just started getting vaccines now. So you're thinking in the G20, there are actually countries that cannot get vaccines. So that's going to be an issue because those travelers aren't going to travel. And the US, if you look at the US travel, yes, they're going to the Caribbean and Mexico, but those are areas that do not have vaccines either. And they have a population that don't have vaccines. So we've got some time to go before we go through this. But I think the public-private partnerships, working together, understanding how valuable this industry is and how many spin-offs, there's a domino effect. Those pubs, those restaurants, those bars, they all got affected, not just from domestic lockdowns, but because the tourists didn't come.
Friedrich, your thoughts on the support, the financial support that you would like to see being offered to the sector?
Yeah, I think, the financial systems or the financial support systems, public support systems, by the way, also private support systems, when you look at investor money, has been strong and aligned. I mean, we got furlough support, we got Kurzarbeit in Germany, there was loans, but also, the investors have stood with the industry. The issue is a little bit, an industry without revenue is not a good industry, right? So it's good to have the money, but it's not replacing revenues, and it's accruing debt, and it's something which is to be repaid in the future. So that's important. I think governments, I think, have done a good job. I think a good job in Europe to support the industry. That's my view in general. I think now what governments should be, in my view, is main responsibility get vaccinations up, because if the vaccination levels go up, this is a solid level of a future prosperous industry, and also that we can live well with the pandemic. And Nigel, I think your country is a world champion, let's say, together with Israel, to get people, everybody is looking to you, what kind of freedom you give to vaccinated Brits in terms of rights of movement and rights of going to the pubs. I saw the pictures were in the German TV all over the place, right? And going shopping again. I think that's important. Give the freedom to the people back with vaccination. I think it's a good thing, and that's the basis which the states only can do, that the state programs can do if they are done well.
Thank you very much. Roberto, I've only 60 seconds, but a quick thought from you to finish on the support that you want, the financial ongoing support that you would like.
Well, I think that I would definitely agree with what was just said, that the public and private sector supports have been definitely there. And so we are being able to access the furlough schemes. I mean, whatever scheme is put in place at the national level. And also in the private sector, I must say that there has been a great financial support given. All the big companies have been able to access, financing, refinancing, huge amounts of money that have been allowing us to be idle for such a long period of time, waiting to go back. I think that in the short term, of course, we need to continue to manage the emergency. And but I mean, it would be great to see that there is a better, I would say, communication and coordination to make sure that public and private are coming together and plan the recovery as soon as possible, because this pent-up demand is there and it will be available to us if we do all the right things.
And in fact, you take us right back to where we started, which is the perfect place to finish, with an emphasis on coordination and communication, because those two themes are relevant to the other broader issues that we've talked about, from offering flexibility and safety to consumers to offering them holidays that are sustainable and authentic. And it's also been fascinating to hear all of you reflect on the centrality of vaccination rollouts in terms of the sector's ability to build on what it has into a more long-term recovery. All five of you, it's been fascinating to listen to you. Thank you very much indeed to Caroline Leboucher from Atout France, Roberto Martinoli from Silversea Cruises, Friedrich Joussen from the TUI Group, Nigel Huddleston, MP, Minister of Tourism of the UK, and Robin Ingle, Chairman and CEO of Ingle International. And to all of you, whether you're watching in Cancun at the WTTC's Global Summit or watching all around the world. From me, Ros Atkins from the BBC, thank you very much indeed for watching. I'm absolutely certain you'll have found it very useful. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.